3 days later, on the way to meet Elaine, the tension between Marcus and Leah erupted in the confines of the car. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, breaking a 20-minute silence. "We're driving 3 hours to meet a woman who helped drain our inheritance. I should be meeting with financial aid offices for the twins instead." "We need answers, Marcus." "What answers?" "Dad betrayed us. He made promises he knew he couldn't keep. That's all there is to it." Leah gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You didn't read his journal entry the way I did. He was tormented by this. There has to be more to the story." "There always is, isn't there?" Marcus's voice rose. "Some justification, some noble reason. But it doesn't change the fact that my kids don't have college funds now. It doesn't change the fact that Dad lied to our faces for years. If you're so convinced, why did you even come?" Marcus stared out the window. "Because I need to look this woman in the eye. I need to understand what made her so special that Dad would sacrifice our future for hers." The rest of the drive passed in strained silence, both siblings lost in their separate grief and anger. By the time they reached Meadowbrook Assisted Living, they were barely speaking, united only by their desperate need for answers. It was the night before the funeral when Leah found the journal. While searching for family photos in her father's study, she discovered a worn leather notebook tucked behind his engineering texts. The final entry was dated just weeks before his death. "The trust balance is now under $50,000, Lawrence had written in his precise handwriting. "All these years I've spoken of leaving a legacy, but the true meaning of that word has changed for me. I've lived 2 lives. One with my children, who believe me to be the prudent planner, and one with Elaine and Caroline, who know me as something else entirely. The money is gone, but it has been well spent. I only wish I'd found the courage to bring my worlds together before it was too late. The hardest bridges to build are not made of steel and concrete, but of truth between the people we love." Leah closed the journal with trembling hands, not yet understanding what it meant, but feeling the foundations of what she thought she knew about her father beginning to shift. It felt like a truth too raw to share while they were still burying their father, a private grief she needed to process alone before bringing it to Marcus. The next day, with grief still raw, she couldn't bring herself to mention the journal to Marcus. She needed time to process what she'd read. But as they lowered their father's casket into the ground, the words echoed in her mind. 2 lives. The hardest bridges to build are not made of steel and concrete. It was supposed to be a formality. 20 days after Lawrence Whitman's funeral, his children gathered at the family attorney's office for the reading of the trust documents. The trust that their father had mentioned in nearly every conversation about the future. The trust that would put his grandchildren through college. The trust that would, as he'd proudly reminded them, be my final gift to you all. Leah Whitman Collins straightened her back in the leather chair, feeling the weight of her father's absence in the room where he'd conducted business for decades. Across from her, her younger brother Marcus fidgeted with his wedding band, a nervous habit since childhood. "I'm not sure how to begin," said Richard Townsend, their father's attorney and trustee for over 30 years. His voice caught slightly. "The Lawrence Whitman Family Trust currently contains assets valued at approximately $42,000. The silence that followed was absolute. Leah blinked, certain she'd misheard. "You mean $4.2 million? She corrected, a tight smile forming. "Dad always said he had just over $4 million set aside for us." Richard removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I wish that were the case, Leah. As of last month's statement, the trust holds $42,347.19. That's all that remains." Marcus leaned forward, his face flushing. "That's impossible. Dad talked about this trust our entire lives, how college would be covered for my kids, how we'd have seed money for our retirement. He showed me statements, millions, not thousands." Those statements would have been accurate at one time, Richard said quietly. But over the past 7 years, there have been systematic withdrawals, large ones. Leah felt the room tilt slightly. Who authorized those withdrawals? Your father did. He was the grantor of the trust and retained withdrawal rights. I processed the transactions at his direction. And you never thought to mention that he was draining the entire trust. Marcus's voice rose. Millions of dollars just gone. Richard's expression tightened. Harold was my client. The trust was revocable. He had every legal right to access those funds. But where did it go? Leah whispered, still unable to process the magnitude of what they were hearing. $4 million doesn't just vanish. Richard slid a folder across the mahogany desk. I've prepared a summary of the major withdrawals. Beyond that, I can't speculate on how your father allocated these funds. Client confidentiality extends beyond death. As Leah opened the folder, her father's immaculate signature stared back at her from dozens of withdrawal authorizations. Monthly withdrawals of $30,000 to $50,000. Occasional larger sums. $250,000, $500,000. All authorized, all legal, all secret. The trust fund was empty, and no one had told them. Lawrence Whitman had built his reputation on precision. A structural engineer who oversaw the construction of bridges and skyscrapers across 3 states, he approached life with the same exacting standards he applied to his work. Everything calculated, measured, accounted for. Your father kept meticulous records, Leah's mother used to say before her passing 15 years earlier. He knows where every penny goes. And it was true. Lawrence tracked household expenses in leather-bound ledgers long after digital tools became available. He could recite his account balances without checking statements. Financial discipline wasn't just a practice for Lawrence, it was a moral virtue. Live beneath your means, he would lecture his children. Build wealth silently. Take care of your future before you indulge your present. For Leah and Marcus, these lessons formed the backdrop of their childhoods. Their father wasn't a wealthy man by birth. His own parents had struggled through the recession of the early 1980s, nearly losing their home. Harold had put himself through engineering school, working nights and weekends, graduating without debt through sheer determination. By his 50s, Harold had accumulated substantial wealth through disciplined saving and shrewd investments. He lived modestly in the same 4-bedroom colonial he'd purchased as a young father. He drove sensible cars for a decade before replacing them. His one visible indulgence was an annual fishing trip to Montana. I'm not building wealth for myself, he would tell his children. I'm building it for you and your children. The Whitman Trust will be there when you need it most. This wasn't just talk. On Leah's 30th birthday, Harold had shown her a trust statement, $2.3 million at that time, growing steadily. When Marcus's twins were born, Harold had taken him into his study, showing him updated figures, $3.7 million. College is covered, he'd said with quiet pride. All 4 grandchildren, and there will be plenty left for whatever else they might need. So how had it disappeared? 3 days after the devastating meeting with Richard, Leah sat at her kitchen table, spreadsheets and bank statements scattered around her. Marcus paced behind her, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, that's correct. Harold Whitman. I understand you can't provide specific information, but I'm just trying to confirm whether my father had accounts with your institution. He paused, listening. I see. Thank you for your time. He ended the call, dropping heavily into the chair across from Leah. Nothing at First Meridian Bank either. That's the 5th bank I've checked. Leah rubbed her temples. According to these records, Dad was withdrawing an average of $45,000 monthly for the past 6 years. That's over $500,000 a year. But where was it going? His lifestyle never changed. His house is paid off. His medical expenses were covered by excellent insurance. Could he have been gambling? Marcus suggested, not for the first time. Leah shook her head. Dad? The man who called the lottery a tax on people who can't do math? Besides, I've checked his credit card statements. No casino charges, no trips to Vegas. Nothing. Investment losses, then. Maybe he made some bad bets in the market. Richard would have known. The trust assets were under his management. These weren't investment losses, Marcus. These were deliberate withdrawals to external accounts. Marcus stared at a framed photo on Leah's wall, their father standing proudly between them at Marcus's wedding 8 years earlier. Harold looked exactly as he always had. Tall, straight-backed, slightly stern. A man who valued order above all else. What about Dean Palmer? Marcus said suddenly. Dad's banking friend. They played golf every month for decades. Dean, Leah repeated, the name triggering a memory. Dad mentioned him in those last weeks, said Dean had been an invaluable help. Marcus was already reaching for his phone. Dean Palmer had retired from banking 3 years earlier, but agreed to meet them for coffee the following morning. In his 70s now, he had been Harold's contemporary and one of his few close friends. I was wondering if you two might come looking for me, Dean said after brief condolences. Harold swore me to secrecy, but now that he's gone, he sighed heavily. I suppose you deserve to know. Know what? Leah asked, her coffee untouched. About Elaine. The name hung in the air between them. Unfamiliar. Unexpected. Who is Elaine? Marcus asked. Dean looked genuinely surprised. He never told you. Not even at the end. Leah and Marcus exchanged glances. Told us what? Dean's weathered face softened with something like pity. Elaine Corrigan. Your father supported her for over 20 years. I helped him set up the arrangements back in 2000. Supported her how? Leah asked, though she was beginning to understand. Financially, completely. Housing, medical care, living expenses, everything. Dean stirred his coffee. She's been in an assisted living facility in Connecticut for the past 7 years. The costs have been substantial. Was she his mistress? Marcus asked bluntly. Dean winced at the term. I wouldn't phrase it that way. Their relationship was complicated, but meaningful to them both. While our mother was alive, Leah's voice had gone cold. No, Dean replied firmly. Harold was devoted to your mother. This began years after she passed. Elaine was a widow herself. So this woman, this Elaine, is where the trust money went. Dad gave away our inheritance to a girlfriend? Marcus couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Dean looked uncomfortable. It wasn't just for Elaine. There was her daughter too, Caroline. She has special needs, severe ones, requires round-the-clock care. Leah felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her. Dad was supporting this woman's disabled daughter for over 2 decades, Dean confirmed. Caroline wasn't young when Harold met Elaine. She was in her 30s then, is in her 50s now. The kind of care she needs costs upward of $150,000 annually. When Elaine's health began failing and she needed assisted living too, he trailed off, letting the financial implications sink in. But why keep it secret from us? Leah asked. Why let us believe the trust was intact if he was spending it all on strangers? Dean's expression was gentle but firm. They weren't strangers to him, Leah. Elaine was the love of his later life, and Caroline became like family to him. As for why he didn't tell you, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Harold was a proud man. He'd made you certain promises about your future, about your children's education. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, his investments suffered like everyone else's. Then Caroline needed increasingly expensive medical interventions, and Elaine was diagnosed with early-onset dementia. "He could have told us," Marcus insisted. "We would have understood." Dean looked skeptical. "Would you?" Harold wasn't sure. He feared you'd ask him to choose between his promises to you and his commitment to them. "So he chose them," Marcus said flatly. "He tried not to choose at all, for as long as possible," Dean corrected. "He liquidated other investments. He downsized his retirement accounts. He did everything he could to meet all his obligations, until finally, the trust was the only substantial asset left." Leah stared into her cooling coffee. "Does she know? This Elaine? Does she know what Dad sacrificed for her?" Dean shook his head. "Elaine's dementia is advanced now. She has good days and bad. On her good days, she still asks about Harold." He hesitated. "She loved him very much, if that matters." It didn't matter. Not then. Not as Leah and Marcus drove in silence from the coffee shop, their worldview crumbling around them. Not as they pulled into the driveway of their childhood home, the home they would now need to sell to cover their father's modest remaining debts. The house felt different now. The furniture, the photographs, the shelves of engineering books, all of it seemed to belong to a stranger, a man they thought they'd known. "I don't understand how he could do this," Marcus said, staring at a family portrait on the mantel. "How he could lie to us for years." "He didn't technically lie," Leah said, surprising herself by defending her father. "He just omitted the truth. He showed me trust statements. He explicitly promised that money to my children." "Those statements must have been from before he started the major withdrawals." Marcus shook his head, anger building. "That's manipulation, Leah. He let us plan our lives around money he knew wouldn't be there. Tina and I have been counting on that money for the twins' education. We turned down her parents' offer to contribute to 529 plans because Dad insisted he had it covered. Now, what are we supposed to do?" Leah had no answer. Her own financial situation was more secure. Her husband's medical practice was successful, their mortgage nearly paid off. But she'd counted on the trust too, had mentally allocated it toward early retirement, toward helping her daughter start a business. "Maybe we should meet her," Leah said suddenly. "Meet who?" "Elaine. See where all this money went." Marcus stared at her incredulously. "Why would we do that?" "Because right now, she's just an abstract concept, a name, the woman who took our inheritance. Maybe if we saw her, spoke to her, understood why Dad—" She broke off, unsure how to finish the thought. "What good would that do?" "The money's gone, Leah. I need to understand. Don't you?" 3 days later, they stood in the lobby of Meadowbrook Assisted Living in New Haven, Connecticut. The facility was upscale. Warm lighting, tasteful furnishings, fresh flowers at the reception desk. An expensive place, the kind that could easily consume thousands of dollars monthly. "We're here to see Elaine Corrigan," Leah told the receptionist, her heart pounding. She hesitated, unsure how to identify themselves. "Family friends," Marcus supplied, his voice tight. They were directed to a sunlit common room where a slender woman with silver hair sat by a window, a book open on her lap. She looked up as they approached, her expression pleasant but blank. "Elaine," Leah said gently. "I'm Leah, and this is my brother Marcus. We're Harold Whitman's children." Something flickered in the woman's pale blue eyes. Recognition, confusion, perhaps fear. "Harold," she repeated. "Is he coming today?" Leah swallowed hard. "No, I'm afraid not. Dad passed away last month." Elaine stared at them, processing this information. Then her face crumpled, tears filling her eyes. Harold is gone? Yes, Marcus said, his voice softer than Leah had expected. I'm sorry. Elaine pressed a tissue to her eyes. He was supposed to come on Thursday. We always have lunch on Thursday. Leah and Marcus exchanged a glance. Their father had never mentioned weekly trips to Connecticut. But then, there was so much he hadn't mentioned. May we sit with you a while? Leah asked. Elaine nodded, gesturing to nearby chairs. As they sat, Leah noticed photographs on the small table beside Elaine, including one of their father, smiling more openly than they were used to seeing. In the photo, he had his arm around Elaine, both of them on what looked like a cruise ship deck. You look confused, Elaine said, surprising them with her perceptiveness. He didn't tell you about me. It wasn't a question. No, Marcus acknowledged, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. He didn't. Elaine nodded slowly. He wanted to, many times, but he was afraid. Of what? Leah asked. Of disappointing you, of having to explain choices he wasn't sure you would understand. She touched the photograph gently. He loved you both so much. He hated keeping secrets from you. Then why did he? Marcus asked, unable to keep an edge from his voice. Because he loved Caroline too. And me. Elaine's gaze drifted to another photograph, a middle-aged woman with Lawrence's arms around her shoulders, her own face bearing the distinctive features of Down syndrome. Caroline was my whole world. When her father died, I thought I would have to face her care alone for the rest of my life. Then Lawrence came along. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. He didn't have to take us on. He chose to. But the financial burden, Leah began. It must have been enormous. I didn't know at first, Elaine said simply. He never let me see the strain. When my health began failing and I needed care myself, he just made it happen. She looked directly at Leah. Eventually, though, he confessed everything. About the trust fund, about the promises he'd made to you both. When did he tell you? Marcus asked. When he got sick, when he knew he was dying. He told me then what it had cost to care for Caroline and me. Her voice broke. He said he was choosing pain now, so you wouldn't have to carry it later. But life had other plans. I begged him to tell you both before it was too late, but he couldn't bear to see disappointment in your eyes. She wiped a tear. How could I be angry at such sacrifice? Such love. Where is Caroline now? Leah asked, a lump forming in her throat. She passed away just 10 months before Lawrence. Pneumonia. Elaine's eyes misted over. He was with us at the end. He held her hand until she was gone, just as he'd done at every hospital visit for 20 years. Elaine's gaze turned distant. He never treated her like she was a burden. He said she taught him more about joy than anyone he'd ever known. For the next hour, Lawrence's children listened as Elaine shared fragments of a life their father had kept hidden. The trips they had taken together, the quiet evenings in Elaine's former home, the way Lawrence would spend hours playing simple board games with Caroline, never showing impatience. He was different with us, Marcus said, almost to himself. More reserved, more demanding. Elaine smiled sadly. He wanted so much for you both. He set such high standards because he believed in your potential. She reached out, touching Leah's hand. He was so proud of you, both of you. He talked about you constantly. As they prepared to leave, Elaine handed Leah an envelope. He asked me to give you this if you ever came. I keep it with me, just in case. The letter was handwritten on their father's distinctive stationery. Leah and Marcus, it began. If you're reading this, I've failed to find the courage to tell you the truth in person. And for that, I am deeply sorry. You deserved better from me. They read it together in the car, silent tears streaming down Leah's face as their father explained his relationship with Elaine and Caroline. How he had intended it to be temporary support that evolved into a deep, abiding commitment. How he had tried to fulfill his promises to everyone he loved, until finally, the financial realities made that impossible. As they turned to the second page, a vivid image formed in Leah's mind. Her father sitting at his desk, pen hovering over the withdrawal authorization that would begin depleting the trust. She could almost see him there, shoulders hunched with the weight of an impossible choice. Marcus's voice on the phone still echoing in his ears about the twins' college plans, while Caroline's medical reports lay spread before him. The decision wasn't made quickly or easily. It had tortured him for months, perhaps years. "I made choices that will hurt you," he'd written. "I chose to support Elaine and Caroline at the cost of the inheritance I promised you. In doing so, I failed to give you the financial security I wanted for you. But I could not abandon them. Caroline had no one else. Elaine had given everything she had for her daughter. Perhaps I was wrong to keep this from you. Perhaps I should have asked you to understand, to accept less so they could have what they needed. I feared losing your respect. I feared you would see only what you had lost, not what they had gained. If you're reading this, know that I loved you completely. My deception came not from a lack of trust, but from my own weakness. I hope someday you can forgive me." The letter was dated 3 weeks before his death. The drive home was quiet, both siblings lost in their own thoughts. The anger hadn't disappeared. How could it? Their financial futures had been altered irrevocably by their father's secret choices. But something else was emerging alongside the sense of betrayal, a complex, reluctant understanding. "He should have told us," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. "We had a right to know." "Yes," Leah agreed, "but I'm not sure I would have understood if he had. Not really, not until seeing her today." Would it have made a difference? If he'd come to us years ago and said, "I want to use the trust fund to support this other family"? Leah considered this. "I want to believe I would have supported his choice. But honestly, I don't know." 3 months later, Leah and Marcus sat in Elizabeth Warner's office. Elizabeth was a trust attorney specializing in estate planning disputes, though this wasn't exactly a dispute, since everything their father had done was technically legal. "Your father's situation highlights a common challenge in estate planning," Elizabeth explained, pointing to a simple diagram she'd drawn, showing how trust structures typically work. While he retained legal withdrawal rights as the grantor, the emotional expectations he created were something else entirely. "So there's nothing we can do to recover any of the funds?" Marcus asked. "Not legally, no," Elizabeth replied. "The law focuses on what's documented, not what's promised verbally. The most important protections would have been structural, separate educational trusts for the grandchildren, co-trustee arrangements with oversight requirements, or regular disclosure mandates." "How could we have protected ourselves?" Leah asked. "What should we have done differently?" Elizabeth leaned forward. "The most powerful safeguard isn't legal at all. It's open communication. Most family financial disputes I see stem from avoidable secrets, not legal technicalities." "He would never have agreed to that," Marcus said. "Dad maintained complete control of his finances." "That's often the case with that generation," Elizabeth acknowledged. "They view money as private and financial discussions as inappropriate. But that approach can lead to precisely this kind of situation." She outlined several structural changes that might have protected their interests. Irrevocable trusts with clear distribution guidelines. Separate trusts for specific purposes, like education. Regular disclosure requirements built into the trust documents themselves. The most important safeguard, though, is cultural, not legal, she emphasized. Families need to discuss money openly, not just amounts, but values, priorities, and goals. If your father had felt comfortable having those conversations, this outcome might have been different. As they left Elizabeth's office, Leah felt a weight lifting, not because anything had changed financially, but because she was beginning to see her father's choices through a different lens. "What did Dad always say about bridge design?" she asked Marcus as they walked to their cars. "That the true strength of a structure isn't revealed until it's tested by opposing forces," he recited automatically. Maybe that's what happened here. His commitment to us versus his commitment to Elaine and Caroline. When those forces opposed each other, we discovered what he valued most. "And it wasn't us," Marcus said, but the bitterness had faded from his voice. "I don't think that's true," Leah countered. "I think he valued connection, compassion, responsibility. He lived by those values with us, and he lived by them with them." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "The money from their care facility stopped, you know. After Dad died, Elaine called me last week. She's being transferred to a state facility next month." "What?" Leah stopped walking. "That's terrible. Can't we—" She broke off, seeing her brother's expression. "Tina and I have been talking," Marcus said. "We can't replace what Dad was providing, not even close, but we can contribute something monthly, enough to keep her in a decent place, if not Meadowbrook." Leah felt tears prick her eyes. "John and I have been having the same conversation." "It's not logical," Marcus admitted. "We're the ones who lost our inheritance, but somehow—" "It feels like what Dad would want," Leah finished. "What he would have asked of us if he'd found the courage to ask anything at all." 6 months after learning their trust fund was empty, Leah and Marcus stood in a smaller but comfortable assisted living facility, helping Elaine arrange photographs in her new room. There was Lawrence with Caroline at a Yankees game, Lawrence and Elaine on their cruise, and a new one, Elaine with Leah's children and Marcus's twins at a recent weekend visit. "Your father would be so happy," Elaine said, touching the new photo. "Seeing all of his family together." His family. The word didn't sting anymore. Later, as they drove home, Marcus voiced what they'd both been thinking. "I'm still angry sometimes, about the secrecy, about the money." "Me too," Leah admitted, "but I'm starting to think Dad gave us something worth more than the trust fund would have been." "What's that?" Marcus gestured back toward the facility they'd just left. "A chance to choose the kind of people we want to be when life tests our values. The kind of family we want to be." The trust fund was gone, but in its place, they found something unexpected, a deeper understanding of the man their father truly was, and perhaps a more enduring legacy than money ever could have provided. Lawrence's story is a cautionary tale, not just about money, but about the cost of silence in families. If he'd spoken up earlier, things might have ended differently. His choices remind us that financial planning isn't just about numbers. It's about values, communication, and trust. For those watching who want to protect their families from similar situations, financial experts recommend these essential safeguards. First, establish complete transparency around family trusts with regular updates to all beneficiaries. Second, consider making adult children co-trustees with oversight of major withdrawals. Third, separate critical funds like education money into irrevocable trusts that cannot be accessed for other purposes. Fourth, document verbal promises about inheritance in writing with clear conditions and expectations. And finally, create a family culture where money can be discussed openly, honestly, and without judgment. Remember that the strongest legacy isn't measured in dollars, but in the values that guide how those dollars are used. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Goldprint channel for more stories about family, finances, and the complex emotions that connect them. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else navigate their own family financial challenges. Thank you for watching. And remember, in matters of money and family, transparency is the greatest gift you can give those you love.